This is my house. This is where I live now. My name is Giuseppina Previte, but everybody calls me Pina. And I share this little house, one of many houses that I've shared with these other three people. My husband, Giuseppe, my little sister, Agata, and her husband, Giuseppe Cogliata, but everybody called him Peppy. And the four of us, we started our lives together on the other side of the world in Catania, Sicily, foothills of Mount Etna. And at different times, for the same reason, we came to this beautiful part of the world to spend the rest of our lives. Giuseppe, he was the first person to come across just after the devastating impact of the First World War. He was in his mid-20s. In 1925 he came and he settled at first in Ingham. And I think there's some people from Ingham here tonight and they've made the journey, and I'm so glad that they came. I have fond memories of Ingham. Giuseppe left Italy after the First World War. Mussolini was in power. Fascism was on the rise. People were hungry. There weren't very many jobs. People were starving. And he had heard that many young men from Europe had come across the ocean to the other side of the world to make good money in the cane fields of far north Queensland. And in Ingham he found that to be the case. After arriving, he spent 7 years cutting cane, just his body and his knife, and a lot of blood, sweat and tears. And then after that 7 years, he decided that this, yes, was where he wanted to stay. And so he applied for Australian citizenship, which he gained, and then travelled back to Sicily, where he met me and fell in love. 18-year-old Pina. We married and we came to Ingham. In Ingham, the first two of our four children were born, Philip and Sam. But before the boys started school, we moved to Faluga. And at first we shared, it was on the banks of the creek on Joe Borgner's farm. And at first we shared a barracks, and then we moved into a little 3-room shack. And there wasn't much to that shack besides a roof, some walls, and a dirt floor. But it was our house. And my husband Giuseppe was very clever, and he was able to make beds and tables and chairs out of old packing cases. And he even made my kitchen sink out of an old kerosene tin. And I was very good at sewing, and I was able to stitch together some Hessian bags, which I put down on the floor, and that kept the dust away. Later years, I taught the young girls around Faluga and Tully how to sew, how to embroider, how to knit and how to crochet, and I really enjoyed doing that. Now that First World War was meant to be the war to end all wars, but it wasn't. And along came the Second World War. And after, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself there. Working in the fields, my husband Giuseppe made very good friends with Peppy Cogliata. And Peppy didn't have a wife, and I played matchmaker and decided that my little sister back in Sicily would be a good wife for Peppy. And so I put in a good word and wrote some letters, and they were married by proxy. And if you don't know what that means, somebody stood in for the groom across the other side of the world, and someone stood in for the bride on this side of the world, because it was quite expensive and inconvenient to travel back to be married in the traditional way. But still, this was legally binding. And at the age of 18, my little sister travelled across the seas just as I had done, by ship and then by train to Tully. And it was just after the 1936 flood, and we had to take off our shoes and cross the creek and hold her luggage above our heads to reach our house, the first of the houses that the four of us shared together. Agata liked to keep ducks and chickens and geese and cows, and she made cheese and all sorts of things. She also shared what she had surplus with neighbours. And in one little story, when friends were going back to Sicily, she gave them a parcel for our father to open, and when he did so, he found some of her pepper cheese. She did that so that he would see that we were doing okay on the other side of the world in this strange and foreign land. Here comes World War II. Now, World War II. Italy had aligned with Germany in 1940, and that meant that the Italians that had settled here and were working were considered illegal aliens, and they were sent off down south and imprisoned for the rest of the war, leaving behind wives and children, often case, and they were left to work and support themselves as best they could, with young women with babes on hips working cane farms. It was very, very hard. Agatha and I were quite lucky that we didn't have that. Our husbands were able to stay here. Giuseppe tried many different things over the years, and one of them was travelling down south to Toowoomba and Warwick, where he would attend auctions, and he would buy big Clydesdale horses and draft horses, and then he would bring them up on goods trains and offload them and sell them to pull the equipment that farmers had in their paddocks, because of course there were no tractors back then. And he did quite well with that little business, and he did it for some 13 years. Waking up the four of our children. My sister, Agatha, and her husband, Peppy, didn't have children themselves, but they were wonderful with our children, auntie and uncle. In fact, everybody in Tully seemed to know my sister Agatha as auntie, and wherever she went in Tully they would say, "Hello auntie, how are you auntie?" She was auntie to everyone. Down the paddocks cutting cane, and it was a very heavy work, as you can imagine. Peppy was injured in one accident where his hands were jammed between two trucks, and he lost part of two fingers. He was also badly burnt in a cane fire, because in those days the paddocks were burnt to be rid of vermin, rats who spread diseases amongst the cutters, and he had the bottom part of his legs badly burnt. And this was in a time where medicines was today, what it is today, and so he was very lucky to survive both of those accidents. When the cane season finished, we would all travel down to Stanthorpe, and we would, like a lot of other migrants did and Australians, and we would pick fruit for the season. And at the end of the fruit picking season, which was also hard work, we would travel back home again, and I would have lots of jars of preserves, and we would have barrels of wine that we would bottle and we would use for the rest of the year. But we returned to Tully because this was home and where we always wanted to live. We lost Peppy. Peppy was the first in 1985 to come to this little house, and he died on his wife's birthday, which was particularly hard for her. After Peppy passed away, Agatha moved into Curtis Street in Tully, where she spent the rest of her life, and she passed away at the age of 90, some years after Giuseppe and I. Giuseppe and I were two of the first members of the Tully nursing home when it opened in 1988. I lost Giuseppe the following year, and then I joined him 6 weeks later. All four of us were very proud to be Australians. We came from the other side of the world prepared to sacrifice and do without, and we did very well here. This country was very good to us. So from the foothills of Mount Etna on the other side of the world, we live here now in this little house together, having spent most of our lives together at the foothills of the beautiful mountains behind us. Thank you for coming tonight. Go well. Ciao.